They say family inheritance can reveal the truth about love, not in words, but in what's left behind. For me, that truth came wrapped in a folder. My brother Michael was handed our parents' $1.5 million home in the San Diego Keys, a gleaming mansion on the coast. Polished floors, sunlight spilling through windows that never had to face struggle. And me? I was given a forgotten 50-acre farm in rural Tennessee. 50 acres of cracked soil, sagging fences, and a barn so broken it looked like it was begging to be put out of its misery. When I opened that folder and saw the deed, I thought it was some kind of cruel joke. But it wasn't. It was real. And that was the day everything in my life began to fall apart. My wife, Emily, stared at the paper like it was a death sentence. Her voice shook when she said, "Daniel, I married a man with dreams. Not a broke farmer with a worthless piece of land." Then she packed her bags and walked out the door. Watching her leave hurt more than losing the house ever could. It was like watching the last piece of my life shatter and scatter into the wind. I sat there holding the deed, feeling stripped of everything. My family's respect, my marriage, even my dignity. But I told myself there had to be a way forward. I'd drive to Tennessee, meet with a land surveyor, sell the farm for whatever I could, and move on. That's what I thought. But what I found buried beneath that Tennessee soil changed everything. You see, I grew up in a house where love was never said out loud. It was measured, in looks, in smiles, in approval. And in my family, love was always measured by how my parents looked at Michael. He was the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. Michael had the charm, the grades, the perfect grin that made everyone believe he'd change the world someday. Whenever he walked into a room, Mom and Dad's faces lit up like he'd just cured cancer. When I walked in, I got a polite smile, maybe a reminder to do better next time. I was the responsible one, the quiet one who fixed things, who stayed steady when everything else fell apart. But being steady didn't make anyone proud. That shadow followed me into adulthood. Michael became a successful financial consultant in San Diego. Designer suits, luxury clients, a sleek black BMW that practically glowed under the city lights. Me? I worked construction, built homes for other people, moved from job to job, paycheck to paycheck. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, until the day my parents decided to prove once and for all what I meant to them. We were sitting in the living room of that San Diego house, the same one I used to mow the lawn for as a teenager. Michael was at the edge of his seat, wearing that confident grin he always had when he expected something good. I sat back, quiet. Bracing myself, Dad cleared his throat. "We've made our decision," he said. "Michael, this house will be yours. We want you to raise your family here. Keep it in the Daniel name." He handed Michael the folder, the deed, and my brother's face lit up like Christmas morning. Mom hugged him, whispering through tears, "You'll make this place even better." "I know you will." Then Dad turned toward me, his tone changing, softening, almost apologetic. "Daniel," he said, sliding another folder across the table, "you'll inherit Grandpa Henry's farm in Tennessee. It's not much, but it's something solid. He always wanted you to have it." When I opened the folder, I didn't see opportunity. I saw rejection, black and white deed, 50 acres of nothing, a place where no crops had grown for 25 years, a land forgotten by time and by love. Meanwhile, Michael was already talking about renovations, plans, and housewarming parties. His laughter filled the room like a victory song. And me, I just sat there, quiet, holding a piece of paper that felt heavier than it should have, like it carried every unspoken word my parents never said. That night, Emily couldn't even hide her disappointment. She dropped her purse on the counter and stared at me. "Are you serious? Your brother gets a mansion in San Diego and we get a dead farm in the middle of nowhere?" I tried to calm her. "It's land, Emily, we can sell it." "Maybe it's worth something," she shook her head. "Worth something? It hasn't produced a thing in decades. You expect me to start living like a farmer's wife? This isn't what I signed up for." Her voice cracked, and I could see it. The moment the love in her eyes turned to contempt. I stood there in silence, gripping that folder, trying to find words that didn't exist. Days passed, and she grew colder, quieter, until one morning she packed her bags. She looked at me one last time and said, "You're a good man, Daniel." But good doesn't pay the bills, and then she was gone. That night, I sat on the couch, the deed spread out on the coffee table. The paper looked so thin, so fragile, but it held the weight of every failure I'd ever had. Michael had money, approval, and a future. I had 50 acres of dirt, and I didn't even have someone left to care. I couldn't sleep. The city lights outside my window mocked me. Every glow, every passing car, reminding me of the life I didn't have. So I got in my truck and just drove. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was I had to get away from everything. The noise, the pity, the emptiness. At some point, I found myself parked outside a diner. I sat there staring at the farm deed in the passenger seat and made a decision. I was going to Tennessee. I was going to sell the land. Even if it was worthless, I'd get rid of it. Take whatever I could and start over. I wasn't going to let that piece of dirt define me, or so I thought. The next morning, I called a land agent in Tennessee and a man named Jack Coleman. 50 acres in Jefferson County, I told him. I just want it gone. He asked a few questions: soil quality, structures, history. I told him what little I remembered. After a long pause, he said, "Son, if you're looking to unload it fast, you're not going to get much. Maybe $7,000 if somebody wants it for hunting land. Crops won't grow there anymore. Soil's been dead for decades." My stomach turned. $7,000 for 50 acres. While Michael was living in a $1.5 million house, I was holding something worth less than a used car. Jack told me he could connect me with a surveyor to get a proper report before listing it. I agreed. When I hung up, I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The weight of it all, the unfairness, the humiliation. It hit me all at once. I slammed my fist into the wheel until my knuckles bled. That night, I packed my bag and left San Diego behind. The drive was long and lonely. Mile after mile of endless highway, the sound of the tires beneath me mixing with the noise in my head. I thought about Grandpa Henry, the man whose name was on the deed before mine. He was a hard man. Quiet, proud, the kind of man who could fix anything except his own heart. He used to tell me, "This soil has history, Daniel. You just have to respect it." Back then, I thought he was talking nonsense. All I remembered of that farm was heat, sweat, and long summer days pulling weeds until my back ached. When I turned 18, I left and never looked back, and now here I was, being pulled right back to it, like the land itself refused to let me go. When I crossed into Tennessee, the world felt different. The air was cooler, the trees taller, the sky wider. The city noise in my mind started to fade, but the silence it left behind was almost worse. As I turned down the narrow country road that led to the farm, I felt my chest tighten. And then, there it was, Grandpa's farm. The gravel driveway crunched beneath my tires. The farmhouse stood crooked on its foundation, windows shattered, paint peeled away by decades of rain. The porch sagged, the roof caved in on one corner, the fences were split and hanging. The barn nothing more than a skeleton of its former self. Everything was still, like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for me to do something. I stepped out of the truck and stared at the land stretching around me, 50 acres of forgotten earth. But as the wind passed over the fields, something in me stirred. I couldn't explain it. It was almost like the land was whispering, calling me to look closer, to see what I'd been too blind to see before. The air felt heavy, charged, like a secret buried deep beneath the soil, and I didn't know it yet. But what the surveyor was about to tell me the next morning would change everything. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about Grandpa, about myself, because that farm, that worthless land, wasn't dead. It was hiding something that could rewrite our entire family's history. And for the first time in my life, I realized maybe my inheritance wasn't a curse after all. Maybe it was the key to uncovering the truth they'd all tried to bury. But the question was, why me? Why this land? And what did Grandpa Henry know that my parents never wanted me to find out? Because when that surveyor showed up the next morning and unrolled his report on the hood of my truck, I finally understood. This farm wasn't just soil and rot, it was a secret, a buried truth, and it was worth far, far more than I could have ever imagined. They say rock bottom isn't when you lose everything. It's when you start believing you were never meant to have anything in the first place. That's exactly how I felt the day I stood in front of my so-called inheritance. 50 acres of dying land. A collapsing barn, and silence so thick it pressed on my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. The barn's roof sagged under years of neglect. Holes punched through it like the sky itself had given up on keeping it whole. The field stretched endlessly, just weeds and cracked dirt where life once grew. Every fence leaned sideways, half swallowed by vines. I stepped out of my truck and stood there in the silence. No neighbors, no sounds of tractors or animals, just the whisper of the wind dragging through the empty fields like a ghost refusing to leave. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to demand an answer from the sky, to ask why this was my life. Instead, I lit a cigarette. I hadn't smoked in years. The smoke burned my throat, but it was the only thing that reminded me I was still breathing. I stared at that broken land, the land I was supposed to call mine, and felt nothing but emptiness. The next morning, a dusty old pickup rolled up the gravel drive. Larry Thompson stepped out, the land surveyor Jack Coleman had recommended. He looked like the kind of man who'd spent his entire life out here. Weathered face, calm eyes, a handshake that told you he didn't waste words. "You're Daniel, right? Henry's grandson?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, you knew my granddad?" He gave a small smile. "Knew of him, hard man. But he loved this land. Wouldn't sell it no matter who came asking." I looked out across the field, bitterness twisting in my gut. Well, I'm not him. I just need to know what it's worth. I want to sell it as fast as possible. Larry studied me for a long moment, not with judgment, but with something like pity. Then he nodded slowly. "All right then," he said. "Let's see what you've got here." He grabbed his gear, shouldered his pack, and started walking toward the fields. I followed, boots crunching over dry earth that cracked like brittle glass under the sun. As I watched him set up his equipment, the anger started to boil again, slow, steady, unstoppable. This was what my life had come to, waiting for a stranger to tell me that everything I had, my inheritance, my pride, my marriage, was worth nothing. But deep down, beneath all that bitterness, there was something else, a quiet, gnawing question. If this land was so worthless, why had Grandpa Henry refused to sell it all those years? He'd turned down offer after offer. Developers, farmers, investors, and he sent them all away. Why? What was he protecting? I didn't know it then, but that question was about to change everything. The farmhouse creaked under my weight as I woke up the next morning. Birds chirped outside the broken window. The floor sagged. Every surface was coated in dust, untouched for decades. I sat up and stared at the deed on the nightstand, just a thin piece of paper. Yet it carried the full weight of every failure in my life. Emily's face flashed in my mind. The way she'd looked at me that night before she left. Disgust, disappointment, and Michael, probably sipping his morning coffee in a luxury kitchen, basking in the approval of our parents. I thought about Grandpa Henry too. About the way he used to talk about legacy, about how land was life. I never understood him. Not then, all I saw was an empty field and a broken legacy. Larry showed up just after sunrise. His old truck rumbled into the drive, tires grinding over gravel. He stepped out, clipboard under his arm, measuring device in hand. "Morning, Daniel," he said, voice calm and steady. "We'll start with the boundaries, then run some soil tests." I followed as he walked the property, marking points, jotting notes, driving stakes into the ground. Hours passed. The only sounds were the wind, the crunch of his boots, and the quiet clicks of his instruments. I kept my distance, hands shoved in my pockets, feeling like an intruder on land that technically belonged to me. Larry moved carefully, methodically, stopping near the tree line, crouching to study the ground, running his hands over the dirt like he could read it. Finally, he said, "Soil samples first. That'll tell us if the ground has anything left in it or if it's truly dead." I nodded, trying to sound indifferent. "I just need to know if it's worth selling. If not, I'll take whatever I can get." Larry looked at me, long and thoughtful. Your granddad never saw it that way, he said. He turned down more offers than I can count. People came from out of state trying to buy this place. He always said no. Why? I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. Why would he hold on to a farm that couldn't produce? Larry shrugged. Some men believe in the value of land beyond what you see on the surface. Henry was one of them. Never explained himself, but he sure as hell wasn't letting this place go. That answer didn't calm me. It made me more restless. I could still see Grandpa Henry's hard stare, the way he'd talk about legacy while I worked under the brutal summer sun. Sweat stinging my eyes, wondering why he was so stubborn. Back then, I thought he was just a man clinging to a dream that had already died, but now, I wasn't so sure. That night, I lit a small fire in the old fireplace. The farmhouse was cold, the wind rattling through the cracks in the walls. I sat in a rocking chair, the firelight flickering across the empty room. My phone buzzed on the table. Michael. For a second, I thought about ignoring it, but I didn't. Daniel, he said, voice smooth, smug. I heard you went out to Tennessee. Trying to play farmer now? I clenched my jaw. I'm not playing anything. He laughed. That same sharp, cutting sound that used to echo through every childhood argument we ever had. Well, when you realize that land is worthless, you can always crash here. Maybe I'll let you take the guest room. Mom and Dad keep talking about how much I've done with the house, you know. They never really expected much from you. My hand tightened around the phone until I thought it might crack. Good night, Michael, I said, and I hung up. His words echoed in my chest long after the call ended. They confirmed what I'd always known. To my parents, I was the extra. The spare. To Emily, I was a failed provider, and to Michael, I was nothing more than a shadow. But that night, I made myself a promise. I was going to see this through. I would wait for Larry's report, and no matter what it said, I would not crawl back to San Diego. This land might be worthless, but it was mine. If selling it gave me a chance to rebuild, I'd take it. If it truly was worth nothing, then at least I'd face that truth head on, with dignity. The next day, I drove into town. Jefferson County was small, a single stretch of road lined with old brick buildings, a diner, a hardware store, a post office that looked like it hadn't changed since the 60s. Everyone seemed to know everyone. When I walked into the diner, the chatter quieted. A man at the counter looked up. You're Henry's grandson, aren't you? I nodded. Yeah, I guess I am. The waitress poured me coffee, smiling faintly. Your granddad was a tough one. Never sold a thing, even when folks tried real hard. Said the land had secrets worth protecting. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Secrets worth protecting. I stared out the window, watching the wind bend the trees along Main Street. Maybe I had been wrong about Grandpa Henry. Maybe the land wasn't a curse. Maybe it was something else entirely. That thought stayed with me as I drove back to the farmhouse. The same fences, the same rotting barn, the same silence. But this time it felt different, like the land was watching me back. 2 days later, Larry returned. His truck pulled up the drive. Engine humming low, he stepped out holding a thick folder, the kind that could change a man's life. One way or another. Morning, Daniel, he said calmly. He walked toward me, gravel crunching under his boots. Got the results, he said, but he didn't hand them over right away. Instead, he looked me dead in the eye and said, You might want to sit down before you read this. My stomach twisted. We sat on the porch, him across from me, wind rattling the loose shutters. He opened the folder, slid a few pages across the table. Charts, numbers, maps, I couldn't make sense of any of it. What am I looking at? I asked, voice tight. Larry leaned forward, tapped the page with one rough finger. What you've got under this farm, he said slowly, isn't worthless soil. It's one of the richest deposits of rare earth minerals I've ever seen in this part of the country. I froze. He kept going. The kind of material used in everything from smartphones to electric cars. This land isn't dead, Daniel. It's a gold mine. The words hit me so hard I almost laughed, but my throat closed instead. You're telling me this land, the one everyone said was worthless, is worth something? Larry nodded, steady. Not just something, a lot. I double-checked the test because I didn't believe it myself. The veins run deep. Whoever controls this land controls a fortune. I've seen companies fight tooth and nail for deposits half this size. I sat back, heart pounding in my chest. My mind flashed through every memory. Emily's angry face, my parents' quiet disappointment, Michael's smug voice on the phone. Every insult, every dismissal, every look that said you'll never be enough, all of it for this moment, all of it for this truth. I had been sitting on a treasure the whole time, and no one had known. Except maybe Grandpa Henry. Grandpa knew, I whispered. Larry looked up. "What's that?" "My grandfather," I said, louder now. "He must have known. That's why he never sold. That's why he turned down every offer. He wasn't being stubborn. He was protecting it." "Protecting me," Larry smiled faintly. "Sounds like Henry to me. He wasn't the kind of man to explain himself, but he knew value when he saw it. Maybe he saw something in you that no one else did." The weight of those words sank deep. My whole life, I thought I was the forgotten son, the disappointment, the afterthought. But Grandpa Henry had chosen me for a reason. He didn't leave me a burden. He left me a legacy, a secret, and maybe a warning, because if what Larry said was true, then this land, my land, wasn't just valuable. It was dangerous, and somewhere out there someone else already knew. Someone who'd been waiting for years. For Henry Daniels' grandson to finally show up. And as I looked out across those empty fields one last time, I realized the real story of this farm wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about what's buried beneath it, and I had just started to dig. I stood on the edge of the porch, the boards creaking beneath my boots, staring out at the fields that had mocked me for weeks. Only this time, they looked different. The weeds, the broken fences, the sagging barn, they weren't signs of failure anymore. They were armor. A disguise. A mask hiding the truth that had waited beneath the surface all along. What I had once thought was a curse was actually a blessing so large I could barely breathe beneath its weight. The wind moved through the tall grass, whispering secrets I hadn't been ready to hear until now. Secrets my grandfather had carried in silence. Secrets that had outlasted him, outlasted the family feuds, outlasted every insult thrown my way. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, saw the name flashing on the screen, Mom. For a moment, I almost let it ring. But something in me wanted them to hear it straight from me this time. No middleman. No Michael. Just the truth. "Daniel," she said breathlessly, as if she'd been running. "We just heard from Michael that you had the farm surveyed. What did they find?" I looked toward Larry, who stood a few feet away, his hat low against the sun. He met my eyes and gave me a slow nod, the kind that said, "This is your moment." I took a deep breath, steady, deliberate. "They found out," I said, my voice low but clear, "that it's worth more than you could ever imagine." There was silence on the line. "Grandpa Henry," I continued, "left me something you'll never understand. He left me a future." And before they could answer, before my father could cut in with disbelief or anger, I ended the call. My hand was shaking, but it wasn't from fear. For the first time in my life, it was from power. Larry closed the folder in his hands, the one filled with maps and test results, and the promise of a fortune buried beneath the dirt I'd once cursed. "What you do next," he said quietly, "is up to you. Companies are going to line up once this gets out. But don't rush. Think about what you want, not what anyone else expects." I nodded slowly, the words sinking in deep. For years, I'd lived for the expectations of others. My parents' approval, Emily's affection, Michael's shadow. But standing there on that creaking porch, with the Tennessee sun setting behind the fields that now held the weight of my redemption, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Pride. Not the kind that comes from trophies or praise. The kind that grows from truth. From finally knowing your own worth, even if it took losing everything to find it. That night, I walked the fields alone. The stars hung heavy and bright, and the air carried the scent of earth and renewal. The ground beneath me, this land that I'd hated, this land I'd planned to sell off to the highest bidder, now hummed beneath my boots like a living thing. It wasn't dead. It was alive. And for the first time since Emily left, since my parents turned their backs, since Michael's smug voice rang in my ears, I didn't feel broken. I felt chosen. Grandpa Henry had seen something in me that no one else did. He had trusted me with this, and now I understood. The farm wasn't a burden. It was a legacy, and it was mine. The next morning, the light hit the fields like a promise. I walked the land with new eyes, tracing the fences, running my hand across the rough wood of the barn door, feeling the quiet power of what lay beneath. Every creek, every patch of cracked earth, it all made sense now. The land wasn't mocking me. It was waiting for me. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Small towns have a way of spreading news faster than wildfire. By the end of the week, everyone in Jefferson County knew. The worthless farm on the edge of town was now the talk of every diner, every bar, every hardware store. When I walked into town, heads turned. Some faces carried congratulations, others envy, and a few, those quiet, watchful eyes, looked at me the way people look at someone who's just stumbled into gold. But I didn't mind. For once, I didn't shrink from their gaze. I'd spent a lifetime feeling like an afterthought. Now, I was the story they couldn't stop talking about. A few days later, my phone lit up again. Michael. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Daniel," he said, his voice unusually bright, almost rehearsed. "Hey, man. I heard about the minerals. That's incredible. Really incredible. Listen, maybe we could work together on this. I've got contacts, real contacts. Investors, companies, people who can help you handle this right. I can help you, brother. The word sounded foreign in his mouth. I almost laughed. For years, Michael had been the one standing tall while I stumbled in his shadow, the one with the family's respect, the polished life, the picture-perfect smile. And now he was reaching for something that was never his. "No, Michael," I said calmly. "This is mine. Grandpa Henry left it to me for a reason. I'll figure it out on my own." He tried to protest, his voice turning desperate. But I ended the call before he could finish. No guilt. No second thoughts. Just silence. It was strange, the power that came from finally setting boundaries. I didn't need his validation anymore. I didn't need anyone's. The next day, Mom called again. Her tone was different now. Softer. Almost careful. "Daniel," she began, "maybe we were too hard on you. Your father and I, we should have seen your potential sooner. We'd like to come out to the farm, talk about the future, together." For years, I had dreamed of hearing those words, of finally making them see me, but now that I had them, they felt hollow. "I appreciate that," I said. "But the future I'm building here, it's mine. Grandpa trusted me for a reason, and I plan to honor that." There was a pause, then a sigh. "We only want what's best for you." "I know," I said quietly. "But what's best for me isn't what you ever imagined." When I hung up, there was no anger in my chest, just clarity. Not long after that, Emily reached out. It started with a message, then another, then a call. When I finally answered, her voice trembled. "Daniel, I heard about the land. I was wrong. I should never have left. We can fix this. I want to come back." For a moment, I almost let myself remember the laughter, the late nights, the dreams we once shared. But then her last words echoed in my mind. "I can't be married to a broke farmer." "No, Emily," I said softly but firmly. "You left when you thought I had nothing. You don't get to come back now that I have everything. My life's moving forward, without you." Her voice cracked, begging, pleading, but I didn't waver. When the call ended, I stood in the same silence that used to haunt me. Only now it felt peaceful. Because sometimes losing people isn't a curse. Sometimes it's the only way to make room for who you're supposed to become. Weeks passed. Then months. Offers poured in. Emails, letters, calls from companies I'd never heard of, each one desperate to get their hands on what lay beneath my land. But I remembered Larry's words, "Don't rush. Think about what you want," so I didn't sell. Not yet. I hired a lawyer. Brought in a consultant. Read every page, every contract, every clause. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding, on my own terms. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I walked the fields again. The air was golden, soft, the way it gets before twilight. The fences still leaned, the barn was still broken, but now I saw beauty in their ruin. I thought of Grandpa Henry, his rough hands, his quiet eyes. the way he'd make me haul hay until my arms ached. I used to think he was punishing me, but now I understood. He wasn't punishing me, he was preparing me. He saw something I couldn't see in myself. And now I finally understood what he meant when he said, "This land matters." He wasn't talking about dirt. He was talking about roots, about family, about legacy. Value isn't always obvious. Worth isn't always wrapped in gold. Sometimes the greatest treasures look like burdens until the truth is revealed. My parents had given Michael the house in San Diego, the shiny symbol of success. They gave me what they thought was nothing, but that nothing became everything. I didn't care about their house anymore. I didn't envy Michael's life. I didn't crave Emily's love, because what I had, what Grandpa Henry had given me, was bigger than all of that. I had faith. I had freedom. I had myself. And as the last light faded across the fields, I whispered into the wind, "Thank you, Grandpa." The air shifted around me, like an unseen answer. And I realized this was never just about land. It was about belonging. That farm in Tennessee, my inheritance, my curse, my redemption, had taught me something I would never forget. Life doesn't always hand you what looks like treasure. Sometimes it hands you something broken, forgotten, left behind, and it's up to you to dig, to believe, to find the value buried beneath. I spent years thinking I was second best, the forgotten son, the one left behind. But standing there beneath that endless southern sky, I knew the truth. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as loss. Sometimes what everyone else walks away from is exactly what was meant to set you free. And as the wind swept through the tall grass, I could have sworn, just for a moment, I heard my grandfather's voice on the breeze, low, steady, certain. "Now you understand, boy." I smiled, staring out across the fields that had once felt like a prison. They were no longer empty. They were alive. And somewhere beneath my feet, something far greater than I could imagine was still waiting to be uncovered.